Hello, thanks for joining us. I am Wes Bazell. I am a Senior Assistant General Counsel at Altria and President of the National LGBT Bar Association, and we're happy to have you with us today. If you are joining, if you can mute yourselves because of the Pathables link, I don't think we're able to automatically mute folks. So just please mute yourselves as you, if you're not already muted. We'll turn it over to Bendita and Drew to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bendita Cynthia Malakia. I'm the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Hogan Lovells. I'm based in Washington, D.C., but sitting in a small room in a corner of my home. I am the Secretary of the Board for the National LGBT Bar, and so I'm proud to serve with Wes and to work with Drew. Great to connect with everyone virtually.
Hi, everybody. My name is Drew Levisser. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I encourage people to rename yourselves and add your pronouns to your name if you haven't already. I'm excited that this is a Zoom meeting to interact with you all. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the National LGBT Bar, which is based in Washington, D.C. But I am actually at home base here in Connecticut. Excited to be with you all. I'm openly trans man and I'm an attorney, and I'm excited to debunk the myth that you have to be an attorney to be an effective advocate. So kicking off, if folks go, I know we're in a Zoom meeting, but if you go to the page where you join the meeting on the Out and Equal website, Pathables, under the join the meeting, you will see a poll, a couple of polls that we put in there. I see that some people have filled this out. We just want to see who is in our virtual room. So far, it looks like we have mostly folks who are from corporate. We have some nonprofit people and some that are not listed. Feel free to add in the chat. If you see something that, you know, if your category is not listed here, feel free to add in what's missing in our poll. In terms of sexual orientation, it looks like we have a majority of, well, bisexual and gay is holding it up in the room. We also have some queer folks, some asexual folks, and some straight allies. Gender identity, we have 50% cisgender female, 13% non-binary. We have trans men, cisgender males, and so on. So we continue to add in the poll if you'd like. But we'd just like to see who's in the room, what we're hoping to get out of it. If folks can mute upon entry, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So in terms of, I wanted to say one more thing. In terms of when we're thinking about when we're advocating, it's really important for us to consider our own identities and what we're bringing into the room, which parts of our identities are privileged in the world that we're living in, and which parts of our identities are marginalized. And having that assessment, it really helps inform what role we are going to be playing in our advocacy, what parts that we want to use, privileged parts of our identities that we can use to leverage, and what marginalized parts of our identities that we also can use to leverage and to speak from a position of power. So I'd like to, just this week, I heard about The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. I encourage you to check that out, considering that there are parts of our identities, our positionality that are privileged in our society and parts that are not, and how can we uplift everybody in the room when we come to our advocacy. So I'm going to hand this over to Bendita or Wes to talk about the next step.
Sure. So, you know, we all want a corporate ecosystem where LGBTQ employees can grow and thrive. And, you know, we're kicking off Summit today, but as with past summits, we all come away from Summit very energized and very inspired to change policies, practices, and procedures to make our companies more LGBTQ friendly. And while a perfect HRC corporate equality index score is great and it certainly reflects good progress, we all know that also it's not enough. It's a great starting point to make sure our companies are on the path to inclusivity. But what do you do with all the passion and energy that you come from Summit and are going back to your virtual offices probably in most cases? And so we want to talk to you today about how you take that energy and propel it forward to make change within your organization. At the same time, while we are all getting inspired here from the virtual summit, we also know that many of our colleagues have had their eyes opened these past few months regarding racial injustice and racial inequalities that have run deep for a very long time in our society. And so, the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and so many others have finally opened up a lot of the eyes of, people who are in our space and who are allies within our space to work for change as well. So we want to talk to you about sort of how to harness that energy and how to move forward. So obviously, it all starts with an idea. And so what we're going to give you today are some pointers on how to think through your advocacy skills and how to create an advocacy plan for you to go out and make the changes that you see are necessary within your company or nonprofit or other organization. So maybe you see a need of something that's not being done within your organization. Maybe you see an injustice happening within your organization. Maybe you've heard or you will hear from other companies and ERGs and BRGs over the next week and say, hey, that's a great idea that I want to take back to my company and implement. So what we are hopefully going to share with you today are some steps on how you take that idea of change and really turn it into a reality. Vandita?
Thank you, Wes. I was just trying to find my unmute button. So we really have an opportunity to do three things: to take this and take all of this and to approach advocacy in our organizations through a few different lenses. And I would invite each and every one of you to really know and understand who you are. I would invite you to know and understand what your individual priorities are, and to also have some context. Unlike last year, where we were in a world where we might have been approaching a recession and some market instability, there was, the jury was out on that at this point in time. We're in a different landscape this year. We're in a land where COVID is really wreaking havoc across our country and larger across the world. We're in a landscape where we're in the midst of a racial reckoning, as Wes mentioned. And so thinking about what you want and what you want to achieve for LGBT plus people in the context of your organization is going to look a little bit different. And so while that wasn't thinking about that and contextualizing that wasn't necessarily a tip that we thought of last year, no one anticipated COVID. I think it's really central to the way advocacy is working today. Thinking about how to advocate in a remote environment, thinking about how to position what you want in the context of broader socio-political and macroeconomic forces is really important. We're going to talk about so many things, but really figuring out how to own who you are and how that translates into a successful advocacy point, and how you can use yourself and your own story in the context of that to the extent that that's appropriate is a really critical skill. We've got kind of a three-part framework that we use to think about how to successfully advocate, whether you're a lawyer or not. And that framework is to create, to educate, and to advocate. And in turn, Drew and then myself and then Wes will talk a little bit about each of these key components to advocacy so that you can do a better job of promoting LGBT plus equity in your workplaces. So Drew?
Yes, thank you, Bandita. And I just wanted to, when you're talking about, looking at ourselves and looking at where we are right now, I think it's really helpful. I wanted to just read this piece from the National Equity Project that I feel like nails it. It's from the article, "Don't Talk About Implicit Bias Without Talking About Structural Racism." Each of us needs to look in the mirror and to notice how our particular lived experiences have shaped our beliefs, attitudes, and biases about ourselves and others. And with increased knowledge of ourselves, we also need to look out the window to understand how racism, classism, sexism, and other forms of systemic oppression operate in our institutions to create systemic advantage for some groups, like white, male, heterosexual, cisgender, and disadvantage for other groups, people of color, women, LGBTQ plus people in every sector of community life. And I feel like that's a really helpful framework of where we are right now. And when we think about finding our objective, we all here, we have like 233 people. This is being recorded, there'll be more. We all have something that we feel passionate about, that we need to think about what is front of mind, determine what you want. And I would encourage you all to be very creative. I know sometimes we're working in institutions that maybe are, where we feel confined and we think, oh, that's too far out, that will never happen. But I really think that it's important for us as LGBTQ plus people and allies to really think outside the box. That's what's needed right now. We need to brainstorm our best case and worst case scenario, and give yourself that leeway to kind of think about things beyond what maybe you've seen before. If you're thinking it, it's likely that other people are thinking it too, and perhaps it is possible. And so it would be good to include other people, to seek input, to make sure you're on the same page. But really also, I would say, trust yourself.
No, it's just there. Just straight.
In terms of, next slide, please, Wes, thank you. In terms of, planning your strategy, a goal without a plan is just a wish. I love this. Consider goodwill lobbying and relationship building. Don't underestimate the importance of the relationships that we have with other people. I think in terms of, as an attorney, I think most of our work as attorneys is just the relationships that we have with other people. It's similar like that in other industries. And so, thinking about when you have a plan, maybe you're not the best spokesperson. Consider who might be the best spokesperson where we have a shared goal. And also think about, when you're creating an idea, think about your timing. Maybe this is a quick return, or maybe you're in it for the long haul. These are all kind of things to think about for a framework. Bandita?
Bandita, before Bandita starts, just so everyone is aware, there is a worksheet that's in the file section of Pathables that you can download that will give you these, we'll use it later in some breakouts, but it will also give you the key points that we were going to raise. So if you want to download that and follow along with us, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about educating. Educating is a big part of advocacy, and really understanding your positionality and what your best arguments are is really important. So education is basically knowing, isn't just about kind of knowing the right thing to do, but also making sure that it lands. And your message may be right, but what difference does that make if it doesn't land in a way that's going to achieve your desired objective? And so that isn't to suggest that we should just, lie. It just means to say that we need to be nimble and we need to be thoughtful and strategic when planning how we expect to transmit information in a way that will begin to provide individuals the knowledge they need to take action and make decisions that support LGBTQ plus people. And so first and foremost, it's about knowing your audience. And it's important to make it about them and not about yourself. So sometimes we have multiple audiences, and sometimes we're working with an audience of one. And figuring out who the decision makers are and who influences the decision makers is really important. So you'll want to tailor your education strategy to the way that they receive information and what is likely to sway them. So if they care about logic, data, objectivity, bring that. If they wear their heart on their sleeves and they care about stories, then share a story. Often, if you don't know, it's best to use a combination of both if that's appropriate. It's oftentimes different levels of decision makers require different types of information. And so your CEO will likely need the high level summary, but their deputies or others in the C-suite may need all of the contingencies and supporting information. The second thing you're going to do is determine why they should care. This may seem pessimistic. However, most actions and decisions are self-centered. So yes, people ought to care about humanity broadly, but that's a naive perspective today. And even though I hope that'll become a reality in our lifetime, people don't tend to care about everyone. And so you need to figure out first and foremost what motivates them. Understanding what motivates is really important. What do they care about? How are they judged in the context of the organization? If it's profit, then talk about the financial savings that you'll achieve. If it's the general counsel, talk about the avoidance of loss. If it's the CEO, you may want to talk about reputational harm or reputational boost. If it's your divisional leader, you may want to talk about the impact on their division metrics or productivity or engagement. But in all cases, you'll want to focus your data gathering and your supportive arguments around what is going to sway your audience, not necessarily what you find persuasive. And I find that to be really challenging because I think the arguments around equity are all really important. But oftentimes the people who are in power are not always people that are necessarily on the same page as we are. And so we need to lead with what they care about because we're most likely to achieve what we want. That also includes leading with shared values and interests. So you'll want to communicate those first. Affinity bias means that in part, all people tend to favor others that are like them. And so we assume that for common identities, but we can also impute that kind of shared understanding and those shared interests. And so, for instance, if you're trying to persuade someone who only kind of cares about LGBTQ plus people and rights, then you may want to talk about how your initiative benefits other groups or the organization as a whole. For instance, in my initiative, my kind of gender pronoun initiative at my law firm a few years ago, in addition to affirming how beneficial those are for LGBT plus people, I also had to tell my people in jurisdictions where queer identity is more heavily regulated and perhaps unlawful, that individuals where names may be used across genders would also benefit. So I'm talking about the Kellys, the Leslies, and the Morgans of the world. Or when speaking to those in jurisdictions whose names may not be identifiable to those in other countries or who use other languages as being attributed to a particular gender, pronouns and signature blocks help ease communication and avoid misgendering. And so if we speak to people to who they are and to what their interests are, where we get to, especially in the context of a gender pronoun initiative, for instance, is there are a lot of folks in the world who are being misgendered. And we have the opportunity to fix it and to also support LGBT plus people in the process. As we mentioned earlier, we're currently in the moment where we're having a racial reckoning. And so aligning advocacy, most organizations, they posted the black box, the black square on LinkedIn, on Facebook, wherever they live, and communicate with their public. And a lot of organizations have racial equity initiatives right now. You would do well to try to figure out how to align your initiatives for LGBTQ plus people with those that they've already publicly committed to or that are ancillary or supportive of that, because you may get a little bit farther right now than by going it, trying to pursue kind of a single identity strand. You should use storytelling if appropriate. Storytelling is a powerful tool. There's nothing like illustrating a vision in someone's mind for the pain, hurt, or joy someone has felt or could feel at their action or inaction. A few cautions. Don't steal anyone's story. I've seen that a fair amount. Definitely get their consent. And if you're providing your own color, articulate that in a way that is clear. Only provide personal details to the point that you've gotten explicit consent and that those details are required to make your point. As in fashion, editing is really important. Second caution, some people criticize stories as not being objective. So those are the data folks. Move on to the data. If they start to question or comment that a particular individual who's being featured in a story has had an idiosyncratic case, then those are people that need to be to hear and receive data. And if they receive that data and they object to that, then they might be part of the 20% who are unmovable, and you may need to either find a workaround to the extent that they are people who are able to be worked around. Third caution, and using your own story, you'll want to understand that people will then know your story, and they may not just use it for the cause that you are advocating for. They could use it for any purpose, including to harm you in the future. So there's power in vulnerability. Oprah's taught all of us that, but you will want to understand the trade-offs that you're making and sharing personal information for the greater cause. And it may very well be worth it. I see people do it every day. I do it all the time in the context of my work, but understanding what those trade-offs are really important. Then there's data, and this will be kind of my last big education point. Marshal your facts. Before you go to anyone, make sure you collect your facts. So facts aren't just what we think they are. So don't be selective. Explain unfavorable facts or treat them as a risk that the organization ought to tolerate, but tell them why. There are a few components or ways that you could gather facts and data. First and foremost is benchmarking. It's a great first step. So you'll want to check to see what other organizations of your type and size are doing about your particular issue, especially your competitors. This tends to work better for more traditional industries rather than more progressive organizations that want to get ahead of the crowd. But if you are part of an organization that is a stick with the crowd organization, benchmarking against similar organizations is helpful. There are several nonprofits out there that spend their time either ranking organizations on their progress or in establishing what best practices are. So use those rankings, whether it's HRC or otherwise, to hold a magnifying glass to your own organization or as a tool for persuasion. With respect to trends, try to answer the question, where are things going for organizations of our type and size? So if there's no existing benchmarking about where people are, understanding where things are going is really important. Where is the industry going? What are our clients or customers doing? No surprise here, but many people identified as being part of corporate organizations. Corporate organizations care about lots of things, but a lot of times they care about money. And so if it impacts clients or customers, your organization will care, but you have to make a more direct argument than our customers aren't going to like us. Sometimes that may win the day if it's a big enough issue, but oftentimes you're going to need something that's more directly specific. How are our contracts going to be impacted? How big of a media kerfuffle will there be? And lastly, you'll want to talk about the risks of not acting. What you don't do is as important as what you do choose to do. So demonstrating the penalties that other organizations have gotten. This happens a lot for financial services organizations, looking at financial, reputational, or other risks. Those can be powerful motivators, especially if you're talking to people in risk functions like HR or your legal counsel. In a land where social media can drive a lot of behavior, the stakes can be high. And I would caution you as individuals to try not to be a social media renegade. So try not to influence your organization through using public social media channels. That may be a great short-term strategy. You may get what you want. I tend to find more often than not that lends to or yields individual harm in the medium term or the long term. And so, don't do anything without thinking through the risks properly. But I'm pretty confident that if you get your data, get your facts, understand your organizational positioning and what your people, your audience cares about, you'll be in a great position to move to advocate. Wes?
Thanks, Bandita. I think we skipped over a couple of steps, so we're going to go back to those quickly. But what Bandita started with was really the thinking about what goals you've set for yourself, as Drew talked about, and then really doing that homework and identifying who the people are who are going to be the decision makers, who the influencers are, who the the whisperers are in your organization that can get things done and that can help you with. So you look at sort of the whole panoply of people, and it's always important to note that the people who are who have influence, it may not be solely based on their job title. So you want to do, as Medita said, to make sure that they have sufficient control and influence. So you're going to the right person. But also when you're looking at those who can influence, it's not necessarily just going to be those who have an executive ranking within your organization. So as you look to do your homework and figure out who are those decision makers, if it's an HR issue, going to your general counsel is probably not the best person to start with. And also realizing how the culture of your organization works, so that you can know how to approach it. So some organizations are everything has to sort of bubble up from the bottom, and so knowing that, you would know that you can't go immediately to the head of HR because they're going to ask what their various departments under them feel about the issue. So really understanding the factual situation is important, and then using that to create the roadmap on how you're going to achieve success. And this is really a step-by-step basis of what your plan is, and laying it out and being very clear and specific, to yourself and to others who are working with you, what it is. And, part of that plan has to understand how to respond to counter arguments. So you're anticipating the arguments that will come against you. That is, as the title of our session says, you don't need a law degree to be an effective advocate. That is, I think what lawyers are very much trained to do is look for those counter arguments, those arguments that are going to come against you, and proactively respond to them. So anticipate any problems that might arise. There's a Mike Tyson quote that says, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." And so you want to make sure that you're anticipating any other exigencies that can occur that could, sort of derail you if you hadn't sort of thought of them in advance. So really prepare for the unexpected there, and looking for that, that best case scenario, that worst case scenario, and the most likely case scenario. And I think it's especially true in these times, in the times of remote working and COVID, is that you have to establish a timeline, and it has to be realistic. Companies are going through lots of different things now, and their focus may be diverted in some ways. And so, you have to understand that it doesn't mean you can't push forward for it, but, if you've got to work within sort of the timeline that others are setting, it's important to know and it's important to plan for. So if it's a self-ID program, understanding where the tech aspects come into it and how it may take time to build out and make changes to your HR support system from a tech perspective, and incorporating that into your plan is also important. Bandita, did you want to talk about advocacy superpowers?
I wondered what it would look like.
Sure. Let me just mute someone real quick. There we go. So there are lots of different ways that you can be kind of an effective, advocate, and everybody's got their particular superpower. Mine tends to be storytelling.
Wow.
Which is why it showed up in my list of education items. Being able to craft a narrative that is going to connect with others is really important in order to sway people to your side. You want to be able to make sure that people can imagine the world that you want them to see, and that that world isn't so radically different that's going to kind of cause them consternation. And so really it's your job to figure out what your particular superpower is. Everyone has one. Wes is the leader of the president of the National LGBT Bar Association, and I think one of his superpowers is of being a very extremely organized and inspirational leader. He can really see the future and is able to kind of articulate in a practical way that doesn't feel like we're actually moving very far, how we might be able to move forward. And then when you look up a year later, we've actually made real progress. And I think being able to moderate other people's feelings in that way is an incredible skill. And so I would encourage each and every one of you, in alignment with what Drew was mentioning earlier, to figure out, what are the things that you're good at. A lot of times your strengths are so strong that they're influential in moving people where they need to go with respect to any kind of advocacy issue. And so don't just think about the normal kind of things that you think about related to lawyers in terms of advocacy. People who are eloquent, people who can be persuasive and always have the right words to say. Everyone has something that they can use that can be influential to other people.
Drew, what would you say your superpower is?
I think that I'm an uplifter of other people, and I also think that one of my superpowers is probably one of the hardest things. Like growing up, I was always told I was too sensitive, but I think I've made that into a superpower that I'm a very empathetic person. It's sometimes a drag to be able to feel other people's feelings, but I think I try to channel that into being, kind of taking a read of the room. And, getting back to if I'm deciding on what we should be doing, I really do care, taking a poll and trying to consider not just what's possible, but what really needs to happen. So yeah, thank you.
And Benita said, I think two nice of things about what I think my superpower is. Mine, I would say, is really persistence. Is that in a number of cases, at my company, and I'm one of the founders of our LGBTQ employee resource group, we were pushing something forward and we're coming into sort of corporate intransigence on the issue, whether it would be sort of a self-ID program or the company getting involved in LGBTQ policy issues. And so what we had to do is, take a step back, pause, let a little time go by, and then start back up. And so I'm never one to give up the fight, but I'm also one to understand when continuing to pursue it is not going to be beneficial. And so for instance, with our policy work, we were working to encourage the company to take a public stand on LGBTQ plus policy issues. This was several years ago when the bathroom bills were being passed in North Carolina and other states. And we weren't getting, there was a lot of pushback that we were getting. And it came down to very clear direction from our senior management that the business of the company was to focus on the business of the company and not, quote unquote, societal issues. And so we took a pause. There are some arguments that you might not win, and you've got to know when to stop. And so what we did after that was wait for a few things to occur and then come back at the appropriate time. So as more companies were starting to get involved in policy issues, as our employees were starting to more proactively ask where the company was on these issues. There was pressure being put on the company in a variety of ways that we may or may not have been a part of in many cases, that helped us to sign on to the Equality Act Coalition with HRC, that helped us to be part of a group of 10 companies pushing for the Virginia Values Act in our home state of Virginia, where our company is headquartered. That is a broad LGBTQ plus anti-discrimination bill. So knowing when to step back and hit pause, I think is also very important. And then, as Bandita said, educating, knowing your audience, making it about them, and then understanding your why. Drew, did you want to add anything to the understanding your why section?
Yeah. So, I feel like Bandita covered it beautifully. I wanted to give one example that when I was the National Trans Rights Project Director at Lambda Legal for about a decade. And when we were out there talking about trans rights issues, particularly, we often leaned upon the Movement Advancement Project, MAP. They have these how to talk about kind of documents that were targeted at mostly at like small, got campaigns, like, a lot of the work that Wes was doing, like pushing the movable middle. And that's a totally different dynamic than maybe doing a case before a judge or speaking to the, the far left, where if you're really trying to push the movable middle, you might use different language than we would normally use within our own LGBTQ plus community. And so there was a lot of discussion in that document, how to talk about, I think it was about restrooms, about shared values. All Americans care about fairness, and, the kind of thing that everybody can find, that Venn diagram of we have these shared values, even if we're so different in so many other ways, we all care about this. Also, the document talked about identifying the right spokespeople, such as, people really wanted to listen to parents of trans kids, or, different population that people were like, oh, I can really relate to that, and then have these key messages. So, finding out what moves people, as Bandita laid out, like whether it's storytelling. One example, when we brought cases around restrooms, where we actually had a story attached, where we had a plaintiff that people get to know, a young person who was denied bathroom access in the schools, we would win. But when we were just bringing a case that was just kind of this hypothetical issue without that humanized piece, we wouldn't be as successful. So it shows that in many different audiences, storytelling is so key, making it personal. And that is so critical to the work that we all in this room are doing, whether it's in diversity, equity, inclusion, with, inside our companies and our businesses, finding that personal piece where we can be speaking from the heart, and seeing in the comments the power of empathy. I think that really drives the point home of what is your why.
And I love the comments. Speaking of the comments, folks are putting in their superpowers. I'm gonna read a couple because I think they are very inspirational. One is being a connector, bringing people together. We talked about empathy, talked about communications, and so it is one is on observation. So I think thinking about where your skills are and what's important. And I'm not the best storyteller, but I know others who are, and so finding those to bring into the mix is also really important as you're going through this process. And I agree with Drew. I think being able to tell a story is going to move a lot of people. It's going to connect with a lot of people. Most people are going to remember stories more than they remember facts and data. But remember what also Bandita said is that some people aren't going to be moved by stories, and knowing how to approach them with that facts and and data is going to be very important. And I'll give you one example that happened at Altria. A couple years ago, we had a employee come up who was trying to start a family, and he realized then that our healthcare benefits did not cover surrogacy healthcare costs for same-sex couples or infertility treatment for same-sex couples, because as I later learned in doing some research, most medical plans require that the individual be medically infertile before they cover them. And so he brought this issue to our employee resource group. It was, it had not actually been on my radar, and I hadn't thought about that. And so what I did was go through and look at where our peers were, what they were doing. And so using, Google and publicly available data, and then outreach to people within the community who worked at large companies. I put together a table of about 40 companies to show what were their benefits for surrogacy and infertility treatment, as well as adoption. And at the time, our adoption benefit within the company hadn't been increased in probably over 10 years. And it was at a measly $3,000 reimbursable. And so we were able to show that we were far out of line with our, both our competitors, with others within our region, and when you're thinking about who to benchmark against, I would suggest, obviously looking at your competitors and what they're doing to the extent that that's helpful. Also, for those of you in corporations, every year when your company issues its proxy statement, they have to peg their compensation plans against peers that they've determined within sort of their category or industry. So pull out that proxy that your company files, find that section, and that will help you know what some of the companies are that your company looks at itself and judges itself against. And then look at other companies within your region or within your state or your city that are also sort of at your level. So I was able to show that other Fortune 500 companies within Virginia were doing, looking at those peers from the proxy statement and laying it all out and presenting it to our human resources department to really show how far out of step and out of line we were with many other companies that we sort of would have judged ourselves as equal with. So finding those facts is very important. It can vary in depending on the issue that you're dealing with, but you do really need to spend some time to research and understand what others are doing and do that benchmarking, because it's going to help you in the long run. And then, we've spent a lot of time figuring out, what we want, who to talk to, how to talk to them about it. And now, this is the time that you're actually starting that advocacy piece. And, this is obviously a very important portion of getting to, make the change that you want to make within your organization. But sometimes it's going to be the one that takes the least time. You really need to invest the time in that, in creating and educating, so that you're fully prepared for any possible scenario that comes about. So here's where you want to shrink down your message, really focus on what your key points are, and like Bandita said, you've identified who you want to talk to and who are the decision makers and the influencers, and you start that process. And when you do, you really do lead with what you think are your strongest arguments. Maybe that is a storytelling argument. Maybe it's based on facts. It's a combination of the two. But putting that all together very succinctly is going to be important, because most companies move fast, and to get the person's attention, you're going to have to boil it down into, maybe a 10 or 15 minute presentation. If you're lucky, maybe you've got 30 minutes to an hour, but as any of you in the audience who are lawyers know, that people who are advocating before the Supreme Court, typically in those oral arguments, they just have 30 minutes to make their case. Now, they've done written materials before then, but it's a short amount of time to provide that oral argument, if you will, for what you want. So what do? You want to start the advocacy. You first identify who those allies are and how you want to utilize them. And they may be internal allies or external allies. So it may be, Bendita mentioned the Corporate Equality Index from the Human Rights Campaign. That can be an ally as you push forward for changes within your organization. And you also need to determine what you want those allies to do. Do you want them to vouch for you? Do you want them to help soften the ground, sort of drop hints that there is something, that this is an issue that needs to be addressed? Do you want them to serve as follow-up? You made your case, and then a week or two later, or a day or two later, you want them to go into that decision maker and say, hey, I understand that someone's proposed a self-ID program or a change to our policy. And there are various ways to utilize an ally, and you want to mobilize them in the right way and in the right moment. And so that, again, back to what Bendita said, it's knowing who you're going after to make who's the decision maker here, what's going to sway them, and what's going to move the ball forward in this situation. And Bendita, you gonna take the next one?
Sure. So I apologize, everyone. I'm having audio issues, so I'm about 20 to 30 seconds, I think, behind everyone else. But hopefully, everyone can hear me. And so, it really understanding what your message is going to be really important. Wes talked about ensuring that you are shrinking your message, making sure that you're leading with your strongest argument. But really, you're really going to want to make sure that after you have all those things in place, that you are listening, that you are really understanding the input that you're getting from other people. I had an issue actually just this morning with my board of directors where I'm trying to advocate for a new equity proposal. And I've been receiving a lot of feedback, and I was very frustrated because I've been working on this issue for months and months and months at a time, and I just didn't want any additional feedback. I just wanted them to say, yes, go do. Before the board meeting, I received probably a page and a half of comments, about in advance of the presentation. I only had a short period of time to deal with it. And while I wanted to scream, what I did instead was actually read the comments, and was able to factor those into what was actually a better argument. I changed my slides last minute, and found a way to actually land what I was trying to move forward with our board just a little bit better. And so we'll be announcing this formally in a few weeks, but we've actually gotten to the point where we're ready to kind of publish some external goals related to diversity, and that's awesome. And we wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't really kind of swallowed my pride, and really took a moment to actually listen to what the input we were receiving was. I'm still learning my own lesson related to, related to make sure your message lands with the community it needs to land with. Don't necessarily be held to your message. And so for me, it's been really, really, really critical. And as is, many, many other aspects of this advocacy work. And I'm learning every day, and I do this for a living, so don't feel bad about making mistakes in this area. You will make mistakes. That's, undoubtedly. That I have a lot of, I have a lot of, I'm trying to find the word. I feel really great for all of you who don't actually do this for a living and who really try and fight on a daily basis, because I get paid to take the hits. Drew also gets paid to take a lot of hits. Wes does it for fun because he likes that kind of pain. But really kind of sacrificing all the things people sacrifice and having to listen to counter arguments that feel really ridiculous is part of the advocacy work. And so I just, try to have a thick skin, in that.
And I feel like that's another one of your superpowers, Bandita, and we should definitely add a slide in here about the deep breath thing. I think that's really important. So the next slide, the idea, you're hearing a lot of themes around listening to other people, finding out what your audience's why is, and finding out ways to connect and what they care about, and doing this in a way of being polite. One of the best things I feel like getting out of law school for me was learning. You're trained in law school how to argue both sides, even if it's one side that you really don't feel aligned with. You have the opportunity, to practice oral argument by arguing, against something that you feel really passionate about. And you are trained to kind of remove your emotions, or to use your emotions in a different way. Don't have your emotions run you. So I feel like that's a really powerful way to approach your advocacy, is to consider, how can I channel my passion in a way that's really effective, that's going to actually get to the goal that I have, but also take care of myself in the process, and so on. And there is a time and place to be disruptive. I think we should talk about that. I think sometimes that is the strategy, to disrupt something. But I do think that people get farther with, kind of being polite, being cordial, having, a disagreement, but you could still have an argument with somebody and do it in a way where you're caring about the other person and you're moving people along and sharing and understanding each other more. So the power of relationship building comes up again. You could still be authentic and even angry, but you really want to figure out how to be effective to make that change.
And, in reading the room, Bandita provided a great example of reading the room. So she got the comments, and she pivoted very quickly on sort of reading how the room is going. So, being in tune to what seems to be working when you're making your advocacy presentation, if you want to call it that, is really important as well, because you may need to pivot, and maybe you thought this person was someone who was going to relate to stories, and they're not relating to the story that you have. And so, you need to be flexible and nimble to pivot within the moment as well to the other pieces of your argument, the other homework that you've done, so that you've already, developed and know and can use to buttress what you're talking about. And, one of the hardest things when you're dealing with advocacy is dealing with no, or dealing with not now. And, there are times when you're going to come up against a brick wall of opposition, and knowing how to deal with that and how to respond with that, and thinking about it in advance is key here. So, sometimes you may have to compromise. Sometimes you may have to move in steps. But sometimes you also may just have to draw a line and say, if they want me to compromise on this, it's not worth what we're doing. And so, compromise is, you will have thought about as you've done your homework, sort of the, the best case, the worst case, and the most likely case scenarios for outcomes. And so that helps you determine sort of what compromises are available and what compromises you might be willing to accept. Now, not all compromises are ones we want to accept either. I think if, for instance, if your company is, very much anti-trans and they're willing to move on LGB issues, but not trans issues, that's most likely a compromise that you don't want to make. We've seen that occur in policy issues where groups try to pit our community against each other. And, so you do want to know where those bright lines are. But you also shouldn't be afraid to move in steps where it's possible. And so it might be you're going slowly to the goal that you want to make, as opposed to going directly there. And, two things that you might want to ask when you're starting to get this resistance from the decision maker is, how can we work together to make this happen? How can we work together to achieve this goal? And, if they're more intransigent, what other alternatives would you suggest here? So, figuring out where their, soft spots are, where their compromise spots are, is also important as you're going through the process. And then, there may be situations where you're not going to be successful no matter how hard you try. And, that's where, my persistent superpower comes into play. You may need to play the long game. And so, in that situation, I think it's very important, like Drew said, that you're respectful, that you continue to be seen as a partner in the process, as opposed to an adversary in the process with whoever the decision maker is. And keep in mind the relationship that you're going to need in order to move it forward. And looking at, what might be building blocks that you can utilize to get you where you want to go in the process. And so, for instance, if you're moving to a self-ID program and your HR department says, well, that's great, but it's going to require an entire rebuilding of our HR data system, and we don't have any money for that. The money we have budgeted for that's not going to come for 5 to 6 years. And looking for ways to achieve a similar goal. So a response there might be, well, we do an annual climate survey. Can we feed that into a climate survey questionnaire that you're already going to have to build, so it's no additional cost to you? And then that would help you again sort of create those building blocks to get you to a full self-ID program within your HR system. But I think the key component here is, taking that deep breath that Bendita mentioned, and, staying calm in the moment. And, there may be opportunities and reasons for you to be very angry in the process. But take a step back before you visibly show that, to understand, whether that's going to be helpful or not. And I do think, showing anger at times can be very effective, but it's a little dicey sort of in a corporate environment when you're going to need that relationship to move things forward. So just be mindful of that. Benita, you want to talk about resilience?
I'm mindful that you all want to gather yourselves and brainstorm a little bit. So I'll be brief, which is uncharacteristic. Resilience I mean, I have a complicated relationship with it. Oftentimes when we talk about, resilience, we're somehow framing it as if the individual that needs to be resilient ought to be fixing themselves to be stronger, to withstand the pain and the kind of beatings they're getting from the world. But we know that resilience is critical to outlast this work. You will hear no more than you hear yes. And you will need to find the window where the door is closed. And so just restoring, making sure that as the healer, you are healthy, putting your mask on first. All these kind of analogies and sayings are really helpful. Making sure that you are taken care of before you go to lead a charge that will require sometimes years in order to accomplish what you want is really important.
All right, so you've got your three sort of tasks: create, educate, and advocate. And we wanted to give you some time to go into breakout rooms. Hopefully, this will work well with such a large group. But as I start to set that up, I'll let Bendita sort of give us the parameters here.
Sure. So you'll see a worksheet, and there are 3 different scenarios that and possibilities for you to navigate in the context of your group. And so pick one aspect and as a group, try to brainstorm using the create, educate, advocate framework about how you would approach building an argument for advocacy with respect to the scenario. And so it's not, it's not incredibly complicated, but really try to dig in and hear and understand what your new colleagues, your colleagues for the next 15 minutes are willing to say, because they may give you some good pointers related to how you might be able to help advocate analogously into the future. So you'll see group A, B, and C. We're talking about self-identification systems. A lot of large organizations have them, but some don't. And some smaller organizations have them and others don't. And so really you'll be in one of the 3 scenarios. And I invite you to just be brave and try to create some arguments that will work for your entire group.
And so if you want to take a screenshot of this, the screen's going to disappear when you go into your breakout rooms. And just select which one you want to, which fact pattern you want to utilize, and we'll put about 10 people into each breakout groups. So we will start to do that now, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes for folks. So we look forward to seeing you shortly. So in the few minutes left that we have remaining, hopefully that gave you a sense of, working through the steps that we've laid out today to create the agenda that you would seek to advance and the changes that you would wish to make within your organization. We have I know we've got a ton of people, in the virtual room, but if anyone wanted to sort of unmute and give sort of any challenges that they saw come up when sort of things they had to wrestle with as a group as they were planning their advocacy, we've got a few minutes we can do that. So feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Nolan Andersky from Nestle. One of I think the key things that came up in our breakout session was not necessarily not having the ability to have self-identification as a part of our HR systems, but how do we prevent unconscious bias for people coming forward and, identifying as a part of the LGBTQ plus community, but not feeling restricted from promotion, relocation, or any type of retaliation or backlash. I think that was the largest challenge we faced.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. I mean, you certainly, as you are looking at what you want to achieve, you want to look at sort of those unintended consequences, as they call them, to see what, what other parameters you might need to put in place, or what, communications you might need to make to your employees to make them feel safe in the change, specifically with regard to self-ID here. Does anyone else like to share? No one's going to be the only brave one.
I'll share.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Britta from Consumers Energy in Michigan. One thing our group talked about was needing to talk, when you talk to management, when you talk to the HR, when you talk to the IT people, about why you need to implement this change in a system. Having also that discussion about around the educational part of needing to tell them why this is important, even though this isn't, federally tracked information, like gender or veteran status, for example, and really being clear and, upfront about that language and why that is actually important to try to rid that bias that people might have.
Yeah, and certainly, what the messaging for each of those groups is likely going to shift a little bit as well to get them on board.
Yeah, this is Kay from Mass Mutual, and yeah, one of the good points that we took this first topic where we're just starting from a fixed binary of gender options, and doing the research about what your regulations in your state are. Many states now have a gender X options for driver's licenses, so your company would no longer be aligned with matching identity documents for your employees that are being onboarded. So that's another point where doing the research from the very beginning could be crucial.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a great sort of benchmarking tool as well that we didn't talk about, is sort of what the government's doing in the space that you want to make change for. But that's a very good point. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Does anyone want to share out?
I'll go ahead. I'm Gina Leah. I'm with Citibank. And one of the interesting points that we found with the idea of gender identity and everything else and how to portray that to the company was basically equivocating something like a name, as part of the inclusion part of everything. How do we make it feel almost personal to the higher ups so that this change can progress? And I explained to them that, I've always had an issue with my name being almost impronounceable to some people, and it does make you feel excluded at times. So I can only imagine how that would feel for somebody with differing pronouns. And that's kind of where we came upon. So just trying to appeal to somebody's almost like their humanity or their personal lives, to be like, this is why this is so important.
Yes, and that's another great sort of aspect of, it's sort of similar to storytelling, is sort of figuring out how to create that empathy moment for someone to understand, what it's like to be in the shoes of someone who's going to be affected by the change that you're looking for. Great. Well, someone, do you want to go?
I was going to say, I think our group, we tackled C, and we talked about why the historical disconnect between the back of the envelope list identification, self-identification, and the system. So partly technological, historical, cultural, organizational matters, and the disconnect between if you can identify as gender in the system, and yet there's this information about the, gender aspects within the LGBT back of the envelope system. That's a disconnect we'd like to solve.
That's great. Yes, exactly. And looking to, that's another thing as you're sort of doing your homework, looking at those disconnects that can develop or that already exist within your organization, I think is really important. So just, the one caution that I have in all this is, especially now, is, caring for yourself and finding your balance. for a lot of us, this is not our day job. It's, as we call it, the gay job. And so, you're taking on additional responsibilities, you're taking on additional work to advocate for change within your organizations. But be sure to take time for yourself, find that balance for yourself, because if you burn out, it's not good for you or your organization, and it's certainly not good for advocating for equality within your organization. So, this is a hard time for a lot of people, especially parents who have children that they're having to do homeschooling and working remotely is not easy for a lot of people. And so, balance all of that as you sort of look at what agenda you want to achieve as well. Drew, did you have any caution you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a couple. I think, especially as lawyers, I'm often talking to lawyers with the trainings I do. We hate to make mistakes, but just anticipating that you will make mistakes in life, but also in this advocacy, and lean into it, to use that as an example or just as a way to do better and clean up your mistakes, but keep moving. Don't shame spiral, and also acknowledge and credit the shoulders that you're standing on. I feel like we can never do that enough. We might all be the only person at our organization and sometimes feel very isolated, but there's a lot of people who came before us who have made where we are right now possible. So I feel like that's really important.
And then, Bandita and I, as board members for the National LGBT Bar Association and officers for the association, have the great pleasure to work with Drew, who is our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the bar. And so wanted to just highlight for those of you who might be interested, and let Drew talk a little bit about a great program that we've had in place for about a year now, which is sort of like a consultancy program, not just for lawyers, but for organizations, to help them advance within their equity and inclusion journey. Drew?
Thank you. So people might be familiar with Lavender Law Conference. We're going to have our 36th year in Los Angeles, hopefully, if not virtually, next July 28th through 30th. So I want to invite people to join us all there. But we named this consultancy program Lavender Law 365 because the idea is that we need that kind of experience of LGBTQ plus inclusion every day of the year. So if it's useful to you all in your companies to have an openly trans attorney, I'm the one that presents the program. Come in, I do a very intersectional approach around racial justice. I have a trans and non-binary focus if people need that. But in your materials, back on the Out and Equal page, there's a brochure about how to make the case if you could use something like that at your business. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to pass it back to Wes and Bandita.
Great. Well, we'll leave you with some, some inspiration, hopefully. Be bold or italic, but never regular. And so as you go out into your week this week, pick your font there as bold or italic, but continue to advance inclusion and diversity. We are happy to, I know we are at time, but if folks do have questions, we're happy to stay on for a little bit. I think we've got the room for about 5 or 10 minutes after that to answer them. If you want to move on and go to a different session, you're more than welcome to do that as well, but wanted to open up the floor for questions. So just, unmute yourself. I think we've had a few in the chat, although it's a little hard there. The chat is rolling pretty quickly, so it's a little hard to keep up with them. But if anyone wants to unmute and ask us questions, please let me know. And finally, I guess if you want to connect with us, here are our LinkedIn profiles as well.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So as part of Team B, and I heard one of the young ladies speak on it, as far as coming into a corporation and not being able to identify yourself or feel like you can freely identify yourself, how do you have those conversations with people, with someone that you may not know, and you don't want to offend them by asking, but you definitely want to, you know, be involved if they're going to be a coworker.
Drew, do you want to start off and I'll add to?
No, you go first, please. Thank
you. You know, I mean, I think it, you know, certainly in a one-on-one situation, you know, I mean, giving people space. I mean, obviously people bring different levels of comfort into their, you know, work interaction. But, you know, I think, you know, what we've done at Altria is provide sort of visible examples that you're an ally. So if you fall within the ally community or you're part of the LGBTQ community, we have stickers that people, you know, can post on their doors when we're, you know, in an office. You know, we, you know, it could be changing and putting your pronouns on your, you know, Zoom or Teams name. Just little things. You know, we've all heard about microaggressions, but these are, you know, sort of micro affirmations, if you will, that, you know, signal to people that it's open and welcoming and inclusive. You know, I think having a, you know, you don't probably want to sort of, you know, come at them and ask them a direct question about it, I would say, because that may make people feel uncomfortable and put them on a spot in a way that is not inclusive. But sort of, you know, just creating those moments of micro affirmations, I think would be helpful. Drew?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite, with the Lambda Law 365 program, we do include a certificate for people to like put on their email or on their webpage and things. I love those kinds of signals. My breakout room, which was awesome, number 12, we talked about, you know, signaling with pronouns and how that really will capture a lot of future folks. But, you know, the story I always tell about this is that when I transitioned during law school, it was very visible. It was kind of a terrible time period already. And the person who ended up helping me the most was not an LGBTQ plus person. It was a straight white woman who was like, I have no idea about any of this, but we're going to get through this together. And so I like to tell that story that, you know, we're all allies in some way, and that there are so many opportunities for all of us to do better at all times for everyone around us, and to kind of just be a human being and signal that empathy and that openness to do better, and that you're going to make mistakes, but we're all making mistakes. We all need to be doing better. But there's so many different signals to do in the workplace that really do effectively push people to come on board. And, you know, I think we all have a shared humanity there that we just need to get at.
Thank you, guys.
I love it.
I really appreciate it. So
can I just add one thing, Tiffany?
Please,
I would suggest that, I mean, yes, do all of those things. We've got the same thing. We've got stickers, we've got ducks, we've got all kinds of rainbow stuff that can indicate whether or not somebody is on board. And if you've got that at your organization, that's awesome. Oftentimes somebody in HR will know like who the gay rabble rousers are, or who the people are who like want to have conversations about things that are related to LGBT plus people. And so if you can talk to those that you know, talk to your HR folks and have them indicate kind of the people who are visible, and then go talk to that person will be able to connect you to, you know, a number of people and help you shepherd other people in a way that would hopefully be helpful.
Good. Well, I wear rainbow shoestrings, so I do at work, and I want people to know that they're able to come to me and talk to me, although, you know, I'm in the straight community and I'm an ally, but I still sympathize, and I want people to understand that you're still human in all of this, and regardless to what you do in your life, that doesn't dictate your character to me. So just trying to find those avenues to, you know, let that person be themselves, even in front of me, even if they don't feel comfortable. Like, I like to have those uncomfortable conversations. So I want to invite those people in. So like I said, I wear the shoestrings so people can talk. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you, Tiffany.
Tiffany, that's so important, and it's so powerful too. And I think you know, seeing the effect that you have, if you are a person who's in a good place in your life and you can be visible and you can speak up. I've been in a classroom situation at work, you know, training people, training class of new hires, and walked in being my big outspoken self, and you know, just but casually mentioning my wife in conversation, and literally watching people's shoulders just drop, like from being all tense, like not understanding that it's okay to have a conversation about being part of the Pride BRG, or like have a conversation where I say, oh yeah, my wife works for the company too, like that's how I got here. And just watching people's faces as they just kind of sit back and relax and say like, oh, it's okay for me to say that here. It's so powerful to be able to be that person that's visible if you can do it, you know, because you're doing it really for the people that don't feel okay and don't feel comfortable doing that.
Exactly. I work for Toyota, so we're very diverse in that aspect of it, and you know they are very open and honest. You know, we have our group called Spectrum, and we even wave our rainbow flag outside of our facility. So Toyota itself is an ally, but there's still people, like I said, that are in my workplace who are afraid to maybe come out and maybe speak on it, even with showing those banners. Like I just need to, I want something to take back to make them more comfortable, although we brandish it everywhere, but I still want them to be very open and come out and be like, hey, it is okay. It is okay. And hey, if you want to fight with, you know, the status quo, hey, I'm an ally. I'm here to fight with you. You know, I march with you and everything. So let's get it.
That's great. And certainly, as I think the chat's showing, you allies are so important to this fight and to our advocacy work. So thank you for what you're doing.
I have an advocacy question that's a little bit less about just the LGBTQ, which is what we're all talking about at this conference, but is more the intersectionality of it. That's also a whole work stream topic. Is Disney very supportive of our community for sure, and I think that's kind of very widely known, but our community is made up of every other group that needs support now, and I don't see as much opportunity even at Disney, which has made a lot of progress, but there's patterns of misogyny still present. There's unconscious bias towards people of color, unconscious bias towards women that I see come out, and I really want to use the strength we already have in the LGBTQ for advocacy in other spaces, because we're made up of every single one of those different groups, all part of the LGBTQ. And I just see such a great, powerful ability to partner and co-advocate. And how do you bridge those gaps? Because they are separate groups, even within our own diversity and inclusion teams across Disney. So I'm curious to see if there's techniques or better ways to join together for advocacy.
So what we've done at Altria is look for ways to develop a relationship or partner with the other employee resource groups that we have. And so, you know, it could be, you know, co-hosting events, or, you know, we routinely co-host Pride events with our other diverse ERGs. So this year, we had Jake Choi, who is a Korean American actor, join us as our Pride speaker, and so we co-hosted that with our Asian American group, ERG group called East, and so and then that sort of helps build the working relationship to get you to the sort of the advocacy piece as well, but. You know, and if your organization, if Disney doesn't have, or your organization doesn't have the ability for regular meetings of the heads of the various employee resource groups, you know, that maybe it's something. Okay, and that's I think an opportunity to sort of talk through things, but certainly, you know, I think being an ally in the fight is very important. So, you know, so we, our employee resource group has been, you know, very active with our Black employee resource group which we call Unify, on racial justice issues, for instance, in the last year. And so sometimes it's more, developing a relationship and then proactively going to the groups, and seeing how you can help, or what you can use to leverage, your group's power within your organization to help them advance what they want as well. Anita or Drew, do you have any?
Chris, I would say the number one thing, to be blunt, I think there's a lot of hostility between racial and ethnic minority groups and LGBT groups within organizations. And so I think your question is a really great one. I think, and a lot of times that tension comes from sometimes, religious bents within minority communities. And sometimes the tension comes from the fact that because historically LGBT movements, at least mainstream ones, and currently tend to look very white, very man-centric, very cis-centric, very gay-centric, and very corporate, because there's something about white solidarity that allows kind of a certain class of gay people to kind of rise above the fray and start to take advantage of kind of majority benefits. I think the number one thing that I would say that LGBT groups can do is to, one, step up and raise issues that are important to minority communities. And, be the LGBT group that after a George Floyd killing happens, tells your organization that they need to write a statement. I think that's how you start to build credibility within organizations. And also, trying to yield the floor. Oftentimes for global organizations, even my own, because being an ally is so widespread, it's a little bit in vogue. There's a lot of kind of global movement around everybody being an ally and participating, whereas because you can only, because racial and ethnic minority means something different in every single jurisdiction, regardless of whether or not legal, which is the LGBT problem. Oftentimes it's restricted to certain jurisdictions, so it doesn't get the same kind of profile. And so anything you can do to help raise the profile of racial and ethnic minority issues, I think would be well taken. But yielding the floor, like recognizing where, as an LGBT group, you may have privilege, and yielding the floor, and kind of being partners with racial and ethnic minority groups will get you there. But just asking the question means that you're already in the right place. And you're starting to go down on the right path. So I'm sure you'll sort it out with aplomb.
Thank you very much.
So I have a question. What if, so similarly to the last question, but what if your organization has told you that LGBTQ is not a priority, that racial and gender is a priority, but LGBTQ is not a priority at this time?
Quit. No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, clearly we all need money. We need our jobs. At least I do. So, quitting wouldn't be an option. But I think, actively educating people about why that is a horrible thing to say. I mean, every organization, even in diversity and inclusion, we have priorities, right? I mean, we're not focused on, focused on blind Latinx people. We're just not. So we do have priorities. Everybody's got them. And so I understand that. I think, talking about how basic equity principles, there's certain equity principles that advance everyone, are really important. So I think thinking about what your particular, whatever the initiative is that you're trying to advance, and figuring out how are the other groups within our organization, the women's groups, the racial and ethnic minority groups, any allyship groups, what are the commonalities here, and how can what I'm trying to do actually benefit everyone? I think you may have to take a backdoor approach to getting your initiative through, while you also kind of advocate for, for more at least open equity in your organization about talking about specific issues. I'm really sorry that your organization or somebody told you that you in particular were not a priority, because I think it's short-sighted.
Yeah, it's been a recent comment just based on kind of all the D&I kind of machinations that have happened over this last summer. The LGBT group was just told that that although we will still be looking at some LGBTQ related stuff, we will not be prioritized at this time. So it was a negative thing to hear, definitely, and something that we're continuing to push back on, but not a great thing to hear. Definitely.
Yeah, and so maybe the question is, I mean, per the chat, and this was something I thought of when you asked, maybe the question to ask is, how do you propose dealing with issues related to, minority LGBT people? Because those people are minorities too. And so I think asking that question and seeing what their response is going to tell you a lot. But what I'll tell you is that you've already heard probably what you need to know, and that this organization isn't where you're going to want it to be with respect to those issues. So I think partnering with these other groups and figuring out what are the things that we can all be advocating for together so that you can make sure to have this on your agenda, and figuring out if there's a way to have an overall campaign about intersectionality, or how all people, everybody's marginalized identities are important, is important. They can't just care when, that's a huge PR nightmare. You can't just care because the public cares. And that's also a way, I think, if you tell the racial and ethnic minorities that, we very well know that diversity for us has particular moments. And so that means if they'll do it to you all, to LGBT people broadly, then they'll definitely do it to the racial and ethnic minorities. And they're not going to want to hear, especially right now in the moment of this racial reckoning, that the second it's no longer sexy, they're going to deprioritize it in favor of whatever the next sexy issue is. And so I think you may be able to get some allies in that way as well.
Yeah, that is what I have been doing. I am currently the representative of intersectionality on the LGBT group. I am the Black transgender disabled person. So I am the one person that's able to talk across these multiple groups. Mm-hmm. And so I've been reaching out to, definitely our African-American group and saying, hey, here's my concerns, right? And here are the different things that we need to talk about as a company, not just as individual ERGs. So thank you very much for your guys' help today. I appreciated the presentation.
I added in the chat there a link, the video series by Race Forward, the hashtag Race And might be a really good teaching tool for folks about why people can't be asked to check certain identities at the door like that and parse people's identities apart. And feel free to reach out if I could be of more help. Sorry you're dealing with that.
That's okay. Thank you, Drew. I appreciate that.
Well, I know we are well past our time, but if anyone had one or two more questions, we're happy to stay on. And if not, certainly feel free, for those of you who are still with us, reach out to us if you would like to connect. And thanks for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week at the virtual Out and Equal Summit.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow.